please pray with me? Lord, you've shown us many times that we can find you in places we don't expect it. So may the words that you've given me speak to us here. May we hear what you are trying to say to us. Amen. So what makes a saint? Well, I know Andrew talked a little bit about this last week, so I'm going to keep it brief. But it really depends on who you ask. Some require you to be dead, and some say it's everyone who believes, living or dead. Some require that miracles are made in the name of the saint, and then justified, verified, and proven. Some require extreme piety and holiness. Well, I'm pretty sure that Maya Angelou wouldn't meet the criteria of the Roman Catholic Church, or indeed the Anglicans. She was not pious or perfect, but she was a person of great faith. And Andrew didn't check on who Maya Angelou really was, beyond the quotes that came up. And so I deliberately chose a poem for a reading that showed really who she is. She lived from 1928 to 2014. She lived through revolutions, through a world war that happened before she was an adult, through the American Civil Rights Movement, and she lived on multiple continents. She didn't pretend to be perfect. She owned her history. She was married and divorced more than once, but never would admit to how many times, because that might have proved frivolous. And there were definitely a few other partners along the way. She was a teenage mum who raised her son as she followed her dreams. She was a prostitute and a madam, and admits to having used drugs. And most of what we know of her in the quotes dates from the second half of her life, when she started to write about herself. The quotes that are often used, and I will share some of them, are powerful messages of wisdom and hope. But it's very easy to not pay attention to why she said what she said and how she said it. She talked openly about her missteps and failures, believing in part that they helped people know that they could come home and talk about things. When she died, there were memorial services in more than one church on two separate coasts of the United States, because her membership of those churches was significant. She was a saint. But she believed that if we pretend to be perfect, then people don't tell us their truth for fear of disappointing us. If parents don't tell their kids that they didn't get it all right first time themselves, then the kids don't tell their parents when they need help with a problem, because they think they're the first generation to ever screw up. That leaders don't show their humility and their failings for fear of weakness. She reached all the people that she did, in part because she wrote about her reality. The good, the bad, and the ugly. And Still I Rise is a powerful poem, and I encourage you to read it more than once and get past the bits that feel uncomfortable and then go back to them, because there is meaning in those words. But I'm not going to spend the time picking apart the poem. So what, in this short period of time, can we draw from her, from the things that she said, for the ways in which she was, that help us to recognize her as a saint, but also learn from her. Because one of the things that makes someone a saint is that they have a great teaching and influence that brings people closer to God. So what can we do? So, connect with each other. She's quoted so many times, and if you put Maya Angelou in quotes into Google, you will come up with hundreds of suggestions. So here are just a few. I've learnt that every day you should reach out and touch someone. People love a warm hug or just a friendly pat on the back. When we connect with human beings at a physical level, or even just say, I would like to give you a hug for those who don't like to be touched, we make a difference in their lives. She said, if we lose love and self-respect for each other, this is how we finally die. We are human beings and we were built to be in communication and relationship with each other. She says, while I know myself as a creation of God, I am also obligated to realize and remember that everyone else and everything else are also God's creation. Now that's a bit harder. Because that means that when we don't like someone and we don't like what they've done, we still have to remember that they are also God's creation. And that comes straight out of the Bible. I mean, she's put it in better words and made it a bit more challenging to understand. But fundamentally, that's the love your neighbour as yourself. And love your enemy. She is a saint in part because she repeats with wisdom the ideas and concepts of the Bible. She said of herself that the idea is to write so that people hear it and it slides through the brain and goes straight to the heart. And I think that that previous one, that knowing yourself to be a creation of God and being obligated to realize and remember that everyone else and everything else is also God's creation, is one of those things. We have to build relationships, build trust, enable people to come home to us, to God, to hear, connect with each other, and remember that they are all the God's creation. So my second thing, forgiving yourself and others. Maya was shaped in her childhood by the murder of the man who raped her. She felt incredible guilt that that was the outcome for him because she had named him. That to forgive others is something very vital for your own self. Now, I'm not saying that we should let people get away with things. But I am saying that she believed that forgiveness was important. She said, bitterness is like cancer, eats upon the host. If we sit in the bitterness and fail to forgive, we cannot move forward. But she also challenged us to forgive ourselves. To remember that we're not perfect either. Because otherwise, what's the point in telling people, if we talk about humility, the only way you can have humility is if you name things, are prepared to reinvent yourself to move forward. But to move forward, you still have to forgive yourself. And part of that is knowing that you can't go backwards. And not everything that you have to forgive yourself for is something that you knew was wrong at the time. There are things that we have seen, there are things that we have done that we didn't know what they were at the time, that we didn't recognize the impact of them. think it's a coincidence that I got Maya Angelou to preach on, and it's Black History Month in the UK this month. But there's no great fanfare, there's no great talk about it. There's a little bit of chatter around how really we need to move to Black history being integrated with everything else, so do we really need a Black History Month? But we're not talking about the fact that we are still in a world where one of our most eminent black politicians was systematically attacked in the run-up to our general election. Because she was ill. She wasn't the only one who was ill, but she was the only one who was picked apart and systematically attacked. We need to understand the impact of that. Now, I grew up here. I grew up in Brighton. Brighton is a pretty white city. At least it was when I was growing up here. It's becoming a bit more diverse. But I still learn new stuff every year, and I still see new things in different ways. We have to learn to see things differently. Yesterday I went to a meeting and heard about the continued isolation experienced by the cohort of gay men who lived most of their lives under criminal codes that outlawed same-sex love and sexual acts. That despite there being legal process, the impact of that systematic environment in which they grew up is still present today for them. We can celebrate our achievements, but we have to recognize the past. It's not about me saying sorry for the behavior of people who I knew nothing about, but it is about me recognizing the impact today of things that I do without thinking, of things that other people do without thinking, and trying to make a difference. If we don't address those prejudices, if we don't address those situations, if we don't forgive ourselves for not having done something differently before, we can't move forward. So I will own that I've learnt a lot in the last 4 years, and I haven't done things right every time. I can't change what I've done, I can only go forward in a different way. But, can we have the next? Our impact is what matters. She's right. In a few weeks' time, you'll forget what I've said. You'll forget what I've done. Today, at any rate. But you won't forget how I made you feel. Whether that's good or bad is entirely up to you, and I claim no ownership of that. But we will not forget how people made us feel. What we can do is change how we feel and change what's going on around us. Jesus spoke the truth, but he didn't just speak. He threw money changers out of the temple because he didn't believe what they were doing was right. It was not enough just to see and know and say. He did. One of Maya's quotes is, if you don't like something, change it, and if you can't change it, change your attitude. You're not going to see that one on all of the little things, because it's not a feel-good quote. Not everything that she did was a feel-good moment. I don't think the poem made everyone feel great either. But it's still truth. We need to be the change that we're called to be. Jesus was the change that we're called to be. Maya Angelou was a civil rights activist. Her poetry, her writings, they were not there and done to make people feel good. They were done to make us change, to challenge, to speak, to face a reality that people didn't want to face. butterflies. Somewhere in our journey, and the magical thing about us being butterflies is that we get to be butterflies more than once, unlike real butterflies. We change all the time. Some of that change is ugly and messy and painful. The process from the caterpillar that eats all of my vegetables that I don't want to have eaten, to the beautiful butterfly that flies around my garden that I think is quite pretty, and then remembering that it's going to eat my vegetables again next year, is a process that we think about. But we don't think about it for ourselves. We do delight in the beauty of the butterfly, but we forget the ugliness, the consumption, the process to get there. We can emerge like butterflies. Maya was an expert in self-reinvention. She was a writer. She was a journalist. As I said, she was a prostitute and a madam. That didn't last so long. She did what she did at times in her life. She moved, she was a civil rights activist. All of those things, she reinvented herself to be who she needed to be. She ended her life as a professor. And if I tell you that her son was born when she was 17, straight out of high school, you can imagine that her progress from high school to professorship was not the exact standard that most academic circles would have expected. She did everything else we've talked about, all the books, all the poems, in the meantime. She became a butterfly many, many times as she spoke about who she was. We have that ability too. And I really hope that I'm not done seeing the changes that I have to go through to be the butterfly I'm going to be next.